The invitation sat on my desk, glistening under the harsh light of my quarters. White, with embossed edges. My name was written in elegant script: Lieutenant General Rebecca Cole. I hadn't been Rebecca to them for years, but there it was, staring at me like a silent accusation. Haley was getting married. The words alone felt like a punch in the gut. 6 years. 6 years since I'd last heard from her. 6 years since my mother had called, or anyone in the family had cared to check on me. No birthdays, no condolences. Not even when my second deployment nearly took my hearing. Just silence. And now, an invitation to Haley's wedding. A wedding where she would be marrying Major Andrew Foster. I knew the backstory. I'd heard whispers about it from old classmates, people still holding grudges, and from a few emails forwarded by old colleagues. But now, it was real. My sister was marrying the man I had once saved from a minefield. The same man who had whispered, "I owe you," as I pulled him from the dirt of Helmand, his life hanging by a thread. There was irony in it. Surgical irony. I hadn't thought about it much at first. But now, the weight of the past hit me like a ton of bricks. Haley, the woman who had once branded me a disgrace to the Cole name, was now marrying the man who owed me his life. And here I was, holding an invitation to the event. Simmons knocked twice, his presence almost expected. I didn't look up. "General," he said, his voice deep, steady, unwavering. He'd known me when I was still a captain, fresh out of training, still full of fire. But time had tempered that fire, and now he only saw me as the hardened lieutenant general I had become. "You going?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I slid the invitation across the table to him. He picked it up and scrutinized the gold lettering. "Foster," he muttered, almost to himself. "The same," I said, my voice steady, clipped, like always. Simmons leaned back in his chair. "You saved his life, and now he's marrying your sister. That's a hell of a situation." I didn't answer. Instead, I stared out the narrow window overlooking the training grounds. A new class of recruits was running drills, their voices rising with an enthusiasm I couldn't quite remember. I envied them for a second, their ignorance of what the world was truly like. "You think you should go?" Simmons asked, breaking my train of thought. I didn't answer at first. His words hung in the air, as they often did. He'd always been good at asking the right questions. The questions no one else dared to ask. "Are you going to fight a war?" he continued. "Or bury a ghost?" I exhaled slowly. "Maybe just watch one burn," I muttered under my breath. Simmons didn't smile. He never did. He simply nodded. "Then go," he said. "But don't wear your stars like armor. Wear them like memory. Let them remember who you became without them." His words sat with me long after he left. They didn't offer me clarity, but they did offer me something else. The space to decide. To not let my uniform define me at this event. I was no longer the soldier who had been thrust into battle. I was someone else now, someone who had learned how to stand alone. I picked up the invitation once again, turning it over in my hands. It was heavy with meaning. Even though it was just a piece of paper. The mission of the military had always been clear protection, discipline, strategy. But family? Family was far messier. Family held secrets and wounds that no amount of military training could prepare you for. 6 years ago, I stood at the funeral of my father, a man who had once been the pride of the Cole family. The Marine Corps had honored him with a 21-gun salute, but I had stood alone, on the outskirts of the crowd, not even allowed a seat at the front. My mother, sitting between Haley and Uncle Roy, didn't even acknowledge me. She had placed a single hand on my arm after the ceremony, and in her cold voice had told me, "You shouldn't have come in uniform. It makes it look like you're trying to upstage the family." I had left that day, and I hadn't turned back. Now I was being invited back. Not with warmth, not with love, but with a single word: behave. I knew what that meant. They wanted me to play my part, to stay quiet, to fit into the narrative they had created. But I didn't need their approval. I hadn't for a long time. I went to the closet and took down my dress uniform. It was the one I had worn to my father's funeral, the one I hadn't worn since. I laid it out flat on the bed, smoothing the sleeves, the fabric worn from years of service. As I buttoned the jacket, memories from that day flooded back. The bitter silence, the judgmental glances. I had been their shamed daughter they tried to forget. And now here I was, the daughter they could no longer ignore. I had to go. Not for them, but for me. To stand as a witness to my own life. To be seen. The flight was booked in a blur. A quick scan of options, a few clicks. And there I was headed back to the place I had once called home. To the family that had abandoned me. Not to mend old wounds, but to be seen for the first time in years. The flight itself was uneventful, just another red-eye between continents. The hum of the engines and the soft lighting inside the plane were comforting in their monotony. It felt like the world was too big, too distant, for me to truly belong anywhere. But at the same time, I felt strangely centered. I was returning. I wasn't sure for what yet, but the reason didn't matter. What mattered was the act itself showing up. As the plane touched down in Dulles, I didn't feel the familiar sense of anxiety I usually experienced. The chaos of homecoming, the bustle of the arrival's hallet all felt like a distant memory, one I could now observe from a distance. I moved through customs easily, my military ID clearing me with little fanfare. No questions, no recognition. I had prepared myself for this moment walking into the lion's den, so to speak. But nothing about it felt real. The walls of this world, the walls of my family had already fallen. It was just a matter of time before they realized I had never truly left. Before I left the airport, I received a call from Haley. She was smug in her usual way, trying to provoke me. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but underneath was something sharper. Well, she said, you actually showed up. I guess that's progress. I didn't answer at first. I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. The words she didn't dare speak. You should have stayed away, I finally said. But you wouldn't understand that. The call ended with her signature sneer still hanging in the air. She always had a way of making everything sound like a joke, even the most painful things. But this wasn't a joke anymore. This was real. And I was here. The drive from Dulles to Alexandria was nothing like the way I remembered it. The streets were cleaner, the trees taller, the houses shinier, like everything had been touched by time, but time had forgotten me. I leaned back against the seat, the familiar hum of the road beneath me, trying to still my mind, but it felt impossible. My hands, cold on my lap, betrayed my calm demeanor. Virginia looked perfect, like a postcard from an ideal world, the kind that pretended everything was in place. I could see it, the small, quaint houses with the manicured lawns, the cherry blossoms in full bloom, the clean streets where everything looked pristine, orderly, and untouched by time. The image didn't fit me anymore. Not the woman I'd become, and certainly not the person they remembered. My hands clenched tighter around the armrest as the car turned down the street leading to the house. It was the same as I remembered, too perfect, too curated. The porch light flickered, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to step inside. As the car pulled up to the curb, I saw her. Mrs. Langford, the neighbor. She was in the garden, her hose coiled neatly on the ground at her feet, watering the hydrangeas. She looked up as I stepped out of the car. Her sharp eyes, always too observant, found me in an instant. "Rebecca," she said, her voice full of surprise. "You're still in the military?" I smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Yes, ma'am." She blinked a few times, clearly surprised to see me. I knew she expected me to have left, to have moved on, to have faded from memory. But that wasn't who I was. Not then, and certainly not now. "I thought you might, left after everything," she said, trailing off as she looked at me with something akin to pity. "Some of us stay," I said, walking past her without waiting for a response. I didn't need her judgment. The house, with all its quiet, perfect details, felt like a tomb to me now. It was full of memories I wasn't sure I wanted to resurrect. But there was no avoiding it. I had come here for something bigger than myself. To stand up for myself in a way I had never been allowed to before. I stepped up to the door and rang the bell. It felt like the doorbell had some kind of strange power to pull me back into the life I had abandoned. The one that had never felt mine. Not truly. Footsteps echoed from within, slow but deliberate. The door opened, and there she stood, Barbara Cole, my mother, always so composed, so controlled. Her pearls were gone, and so were the careful layers of her perfection. Her hair, always pulled tightly into a controlled bun, now fell loose around her shoulders, with strands escaping like the carefully crafted illusion that was my mother. Her eyes scanned me, moving from my uniform to my face, lingering for just a second longer than was comfortable. "Rebecca," she said, her voice faltering for the first time in years. She hadn't called me by my name since I was a child. It was always, "Your sister's sibling," or, "You." I didn't answer. I simply stood there, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on us both. It was the same silence that had defined my childhood, the silence that had filled the house when I was there, and the silence that had followed me out the door years ago. "You look different," she said, breaking the silence, though her words felt forced, an attempt to bridge the gap that had only grown between us with time. "I am different," I said, my voice steady, though there was an edge to it. Her lips pressed into a tight line, but she didn't argue. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let me pass. I walked in, my boots making soft but deliberate sounds on the polished hardwood floor. The house was just as I remembered, pristine. Perfect. Like it had been carefully curated for appearances. But underneath, I could feel the cracks, the lies, the silence, the things left unsaid. We didn't go far. Just the front room, the place where family pictures lined the walls, where the quiet hum of perfection always seemed to settle like dust. I stood just inside the archway, watching her move across the room, folding her hands in her lap, adjusting her posture with that characteristic practiced grace. But her fingers trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried so hard to project. She didn't look up at me right away. Instead, she stared down at her hands, her mind clearly working through something. "I didn't know how to protect you," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "Without erasing you." I let her words hang in the air between us, not rushing to fill the silence. Not sure if I even wanted to hear what came next, but I stayed silent, watching her, waiting for the confession that was so long overdue. I thought, if I distanced you, people would forget. The scandal would fade and you could still have a life elsewhere. You could still be safe. "Safe?" I repeated, the word feeling hollow in my mouth. "You didn't protect me. You erased me." Her eyes darted toward me, her gaze searching for something. A way to explain. A way to make it right. But there was nothing. Nothing that could undo the years of silence. The years of abandonment. The truth was simple. She had chosen Haley. She had chosen the easy path, the quiet path. The one where I was left in the dark, out of sight, erased from the family that should have loved me. And now, years later, she was trying to make it sound like she had been protecting me. But she hadn't. She had been protecting herself. Protecting her image. Protecting the lie that she had created. The one where she could still play the role of the perfect mother. The perfect wife. "You didn't protect me," I said quietly. "You just made me unforgettable." There was a long silence between us. She didn't answer, her fingers trembling slightly as she folded them together in her lap. The air in the room felt thick with the weight of everything that had gone unsaid. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you, Rebecca." But I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her to tell me that. What I needed was for her to acknowledge the truth, and I could see it in her eye as she knew. She knew exactly what she had done. And now, I was here. Not to repair what had been broken, but to finally stand for myself. To make the statement they never thought I would. "You didn't protect me," I repeated. "You erased me." Barbara swallowed hard, her eyes darting away from me as she tried to find the right words. But the truth was clear. And, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for her to fix it. I was here to fix myself. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, she closed it again, her lips trembling as she let out a slow breath. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. I nodded, finally turning to leave. "There's nothing more to say." As I reached the door, I heard her voice again, softer this time. "Please, don't leave like this. We could talk about it." I didn't turn back. Instead, I walked out of the house, leaving the past behind me once and for all. The sound of my boots on the wooden floor echoed in my ears, and for the first time in years it felt like freedom. The morning of the wedding dawned quietly. I had left the house without a word, without turning back. And now I was at the edge of something I could no longer ignore. The wedding. Haley's wedding. The thought of it felt like a slow burn, a constant heat against my skin, a reminder of everything that had been stolen from me over the years. I didn't expect a warm welcome. I didn't expect apologies either. I wasn't here for any of that. I was here because I was invited. The irony of it wasn't lost on me after years of being erased. Now I was the one being invited back, as if I had somehow been a missing piece in their perfect picture. The car ride to the venue was silent, the streets of Alexandria sliding past in a blur. My fingers drummed rhythmically on my knee, the quiet beat a reminder of my pulse, of the blood that still ran in my veins, even if the family I was born into had tried to deny me. I could feel the weight of the uniform on my shoulders, the one I had worn for over a decade, the one that had carried me through countless missions, battles, and decisions. It felt heavier now, as if the fabric itself was absorbing the tension of everything I was walking into. The venue was everything I had expected. It was grand, of course. A mansion tucked away in the hills of Virginia. The kind of place that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who had never had to fight for anything. White marble pillars, ornate chandeliers, and velvet drapes that blocked out the world outside. Inside, there was the unmistakable scent of fresh flowers, the sound of quiet laughter, and the sight of people in fine clothes, pretending they didn't see the cracks beneath the surface. I could feel them before I saw them. My mother, Barbara, stood near the front of the room, adjusting a strand of her hair, her gaze moving nervously between the guests. Haley was somewhere in the crowd, undoubtedly the center of attention, just as she had always wanted to be. I spotted her in the corner of the room, laughing too loudly, her eyes sparkling with something that wasn't joy but a calculated kind of delight. She loved being in control, loved having the power to pull people into her orbit, to make them dance on her strings. I walked past them without a word. I wasn't there for small talk. I wasn't there to pretend everything was fine, to smile at the right moments and nod at the right people. I was there to be seen for the first time in years. Not as Rebecca, the sister they had forgotten, not as the soldier they had tried to erase. I was there as Lieutenant General Rebecca Cole, the woman they thought had vanished. The reception hall was filled with familiar faces, faces that I hadn't seen in so long, faces that had never once tried to reach out. I could see them all, standing in their groups, gossiping, laughing, pretending that everything was as it should be. But I wasn't the same Rebecca they had known. I stood at the back of the room, watching as people moved around, their eyes flicking toward me, then away, unsure of how to place me now. Some of them recognized the uniform, but few of them understood the weight of it. They didn't understand what it meant to wear that uniform, to carry the scars both visible and hidden that came with it. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, all of it seemed to fade as I stood there. And then, she saw me. Haley, of course. The bride. The woman who had once told me I was a disgrace, who had painted me as the problem in the family, who had stood in front of our parents and declared that I was a stain on the Cole name. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw me standing there, but she quickly masked it with a practiced, fake smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She made her way over to me, and as she did, I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze shifting in my direction. They were waiting for something. For me to speak. For me to break. "So you actually came," Haley said, her voice too sweet, too sharp. "I thought you'd be too busy guarding some door or something." The room tensed. A few people laughed nervously, unsure if they should have. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. But I didn't flinch. I didn't care for her taunts anymore. I didn't care for her version of our past. "The people I guard," I said, my voice steady, "outrank this entire room." There was a beat of silence. No one moved. No one laughed. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to make a scene. The truth spoke for itself. Haley's smile faltered. She glanced back at Andrew, her groom, who was standing at the bar with a glass of champagne, his eyes scanning the room as if he had no idea how to navigate the waters of this family. I didn't care what he thought, either. Haley's fingers tightened around her glass as she laughed, trying to cover up the crack in her perfect image. "Well, look at you. The gatekeeper of greatness, always so serious." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. "Come on," she continued, her voice rising with feigned sweetness. "You always took everything so seriously. Can't you just lighten up for once?" I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me now, waiting, expecting something. But I wasn't here to make them comfortable. I wasn't here to apologize for being myself. Just as I was about to turn away, to walk off into the crowd, Andrew moved. His footsteps were steady, purposeful, cutting through the noise like a knife. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate. He walked right up to me and stopped one pace away, his gaze steady, unwavering. Then, to my surprise, he saluted me. It wasn't a casual gesture. It wasn't a joke. It was a sharp, crisp military salute, the kind that only those who have served truly understand, the kind that commands respect. The room went still. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and steady, "I'd like to introduce you to my wife's sister, Lieutenant General Rebecca Cole." The gasps that followed were audible, like a collective intake of breath. People shifted in their seats, unsure of what to do, unsure of how to react. I didn't move, I didn't smile, I didn't even blink. I just stood there, letting the silence grow between us. Haley's face paled. The microphone in her hand slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a hollow thud. She took a step back, eyes wide, mouth agape, as if the truth had slapped her in the face. And I didn't care. I wasn't here for her approval. I wasn't here for anyone's approval. I had always been the one to hold things together, to be the strong one. But tonight, for the first time, the room had to reckon with who I had become. Not just the soldier they had written off, not just the daughter they had erased. I was someone they would never forget again. As the silence stretched on, the eyes of the room shifted from me to Andrew, from him to Haley, and then to Barbara, who sat frozen at the table, her face pale, her hands trembling in her lap. And still, no one moved. The orchestra had stopped playing, the laughter had died down, and all that remained was the weight of a truth that couldn't be hidden anymore. I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to shout. All I had to do was stand there, and the world would listen. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need words. It needs presence. The reception continued around me, but it no longer mattered. Haley's laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, the polite conversation, it all seemed distant, muted, as if I were underwater. The weight of the room's collective stare was heavier than any battlefield I'd ever stood on. It wasn't the kind of attention I'd sought, but it was the kind of attention I deserved. Andrew's salute had spoken louder than words. In that single, sharp gesture, he had acknowledged not just my rank, but my sacrifice. The man I had saved, the man who had once whispered, "I owe you," was now standing beside the woman who had tried to erase me from this family. The irony was not lost on me. The same hands that had cradled his shattered leg were the ones now clasping his, as if nothing had ever happened. I could feel their eyes on me. The gaze of the distant cousins who had always avoided making eye contact when they saw me in uniform. The uncomfortable smiles of the friends who had pretended not to notice the way my name had been removed from every family photo, every holiday card. And there was Barbara, my mother, trying so desperately to maintain her composure. But her fingers trembled as she fiddled with her napkin, unwilling to meet my gaze. I stood still, unmoving. The room had shifted. They were all pretending like they hadn't just witnessed a moment that would unravel everything they had built. They were pretending I wasn't the same woman who had gone to war for them, for this country, for the family that had erased me. But I had learned long ago that silence doesn't erase truth. It buries it, only for it to resurface when the moment is right. And right now, the moment was mine. The party buzzed on, but I wasn't a part of it anymore. My seat, tucked behind a pillar near the kitchen, was just a reminder of how they wanted to keep me hidden, out of sight, out of mind. It wasn't just the seating arrangement. It wasn't the whispers. It was the way they had pretended I didn't exist. The way they had used my absence as a tool for their narrative. I hadn't expected a warm welcome, but I had expected some acknowledgement, some recognition. Not because I needed it, but because it was the truth. And the truth, no matter how silent it is, always demands to be seen. I sat there quietly, nursing my glass of wine, watching the family I had once known continue on as if I had never been a part of it. The familiar faces. The same old jokes. The same fake smiles. They didn't care that I had been through hell. They didn't care that I had bled for this country. They didn't care that I had been erased. That I had been cast aside like a ghost. But then the moment shifted again. Haley had taken to the microphone, her voice ringing out across the room like a bell. The guests quieted down, their attention now on her. She was radiant, of course. The bride, in her white gown. The center of attention as she had always craved. She looked like the picture of happiness. Her eyes glistening with fake tears as she spoke. "To family," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness. "To new beginnings. And to the man I love. Andrew Foster." She raised her glass, and the guests followed suit. I took another sip of my wine, letting the sharp taste settle on my tongue. It was all so staged, so rehearsed. She was pretending again. Pretending she wasn't the same woman who had once written me off as a disgrace. Pretending that she didn't know the damage she had done. But I wasn't fooled. I had seen the way she had twisted every story to make herself the hero. I had seen the way she had used me as a scapegoat for her own insecurities. I had seen how she had weaponized my absence to make herself shine brighter. And now, here she was, acting like she was the picture of innocence, the model daughter, the perfect bride. The laughter bubbled up around the table, and I could see the smug satisfaction on Haley's face. She was enjoying this, every second of it. She was enjoying the power, the control, the way she could make everyone laugh at my expense. But I wasn't going to let her have it. "Isn't it just so perfect?" Haley said, glancing at me with a smile that barely masked the venom behind her eyes. "Our big sister made it after all. Traveling all the way from wherever she's stationed now. Guarding doors. Important ones, I'm sure." Her words were sharp, designed to cut. The room erupted in laughter, but it was the kind of laughter that stung. It wasn't lighthearted. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of laughter that comes from a place of cruelty, from a place of deep-seated jealousy. I put my glass down slowly, the delicate clink of it against the table punctuating the silence that had fallen over the room. I let the words sink in, knowing full well that Haley was trying to provoke me. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. "The people I guard," I said, my voice calm and steady, "outrank this entire room." The room went silent. The laughter died in an instant, and for the first time in years, everyone was looking at me. Really looking at me. Haley's smile faltered. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw it. The fear. The fear of being exposed. The fear of being seen for who she really was. But she recovered quickly, lifting the microphone again, trying to salvage the moment. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "It's just a joke. Lighten up, Rebecca. You always took everything so seriously." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because for once, it wasn't just me standing in that room. It was everything I had been through. It was the woman who had crawled across a minefield to save Andrew's life. It was the woman who had been cast aside by her own family. It was the woman who had fought for years to earn her place, only to be told she wasn't enough. And they were finally starting to understand that I wasn't going anywhere. Not anymore. The quiet after my words hung in the air like a thick fog. For a moment, I could almost hear the collective intake of breath from every person in that room. The silence was palpable. The laughter had died, but the tension still lingered, hanging over every table, every face, like an invisible weight. Haley, ever the actress, had recovered quickly, but I could see the cracks in her mask. She wasn't as confident now. She wasn't the same girl who had been making jokes at my expense just moments ago. Her eyes, wide with the shock of being called out, darted from me to the room. But there was no safe place left for her. She had shown her hand, and now, the truth was sitting at the table, uninvited but undeniable. Across from me, Andrew hadn't moved, still standing by my side, his posture stiff, as if he were waiting for something. The weight of his gaze was intense, but not accusatory. There was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place, perhaps regret, perhaps understanding, or maybe a mixture of both. But he didn't speak, not yet. His silence was louder than any words he could have said. The room shifted uncomfortably, and I could feel every set of eyes on me. The once distant cousins, the old friends of the family, even the distant relatives who probably couldn't place my name, they were all watching. They had seen me enter, a uniformed stranger in their midst, and now they were trying to reconcile who I was with the picture they had created of me in their minds. Enough of the theatrics. Barbara's voice sliced through the tension. Her tone, usually so controlled, had a sharpness to it now. She had risen from her seat, her pearl earrings catching the light, a veneer of calm barely masking the storm beneath. This is not the time or the place. She was trying to assert control. She always had. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. This time, she had no hold over me. "I'm not here for your theatrics either, Barbara," I said calmly, matching her tone. "I'm here because I was invited. But if you think you can shut me down again, you're wrong. I'm done being quiet." Haley's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the microphone again, but this time she didn't have the same confidence. She didn't have the room in the palm of her hand anymore. She couldn't spin her web of manipulation without it unraveling in front of everyone. I turned away from her, and my gaze fell on Andrew once more. His eyes were still locked on me, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I had pulled from the minefield not as a groom or as a husband-to-be, but as the man who owed me something I wasn't sure he could ever repay. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about respect. Something he had never truly given me. Not in the way I needed. "Andrew," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You never told her, did you? About that night? About what I did?" He looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. He didn't have to say anything. His silence spoke volumes. He had kept it from her. He had kept the truth hidden, probably because it didn't fit into the picture they had painted of their perfect life. The room was still, everyone watching, waiting for his response. It was almost cruel how long he took to answer, how the seconds dragged on in front of all these people who had no idea what we had been through together. "No," he finally said, his voice low. "I didn't." I nodded as if I had already known. "I didn't expect you to." I didn't know why it hurt more than it did, hearing him confirm it. Maybe it was the realization that I had been nothing more than a footnote in his life, a chapter he could gloss over when it was convenient. Maybe it was the truth that he had chosen his own comfort over the truth. But I wasn't going to let that define me anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone rewrite my story, especially not Haley, and certainly not Andrew. Your silence doesn't erase what happened, I said, my voice unwavering. It doesn't change what I did, what we went through. But it's enough. Enough of this pretending. Enough of being a shadow in your life. There were no applause. There were no gasps of shock. There was just a room full of people waiting for something. Perhaps an explanation, but they wouldn't get either from me. Not now. Not when the truth was already sitting between us. Andrew's face softened, and I saw a flicker of remorse, but it didn't matter anymore. The man I had saved was no longer my concern. The family I had once belonged to had made their choices. Now, it was time for me to make mine. Haley's expression had gone from mocking to defensive, but there was nothing she could do now. The words had already been said. The silence that had suffocated me for years was no longer mine to carry. I stood, the sharp click of my heels on the polished floor echoing louder than the soft hum of the orchestra in the background. The guests were still looking at me, but I no longer cared. I wasn't going to stand in their shadows, not anymore. I didn't look at Haley or Barbara as I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't need to say another word. The silence I had once been forced into now belonged to them. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, it felt like the weight had been lifted. The bitterness, the anger, the disappointment, it was all still there, but it didn't own me. I was done being invisible. The night was still young, and the city stretched out in front of me, filled with possibilities. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be their secret anymore. The door to the ballroom closed behind me with a soft thud, and I stood outside, feeling the weight of the cool night air settle against my skin. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me in there, not the laughter, not the champagne, not the shallow gestures that passed for love in that room. I had been a ghost in that house for too long. Tonight, I had learned to stop pretending I was anyone's shadow. I walked down the steps of the venue, the sharpness of my boots hitting the pavement in rhythm with the pounding of my heart. The streetlights flickered like distant stars, casting shadows that danced and vanished just as quickly. It felt surreal. Everything that had once been familiar, the street, the city, the world I had left behind when I joined the military, seemed like a different lifetime now. There was something liberating about being back here, though. After years of silence, I had spoken. The truth had broken free, and I hadn't expected it to feel as heavy as it did. But it wasn't the weight of regret or guilt. It was the weight of the years I had lost, the years I had spent trying to fit into a family that never accepted me, trying to hold on to a name that had never been mine to begin with. I hailed a cab at the corner and slid into the back seat, giving the driver the address of the small apartment I'd rented when I first moved back to the States. It wasn't much, a cramped one-bedroom in a building that smelled of old wood and stale air, but it was mine. My space, my sanctuary. The cab hummed along the streets, weaving through traffic as the city lights blurred past. The radio was playing softly in the background, and I closed my eyes, allowing the rhythmic motion of the car to soothe my mind. I wasn't tired, far from it, but my thoughts were racing, and I needed to quiet the storm in my head. Andrew's face kept flashing in my mind. I could still feel the weight of his gaze when I spoke. Still hear the quiet resolve in his voice when he said he hadn't told Haley the truth. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal that stung, it was the realization that even after everything, he still hadn't fully acknowledged the depth of what had happened between us. We had been through hell together. I had saved his life. But now, standing in front of me, he had chosen to walk away from the truth, choosing comfort over honesty. It cut deeper than I cared to admit. And then there was Haley. Her mockery, her laughter sharpened like a blade. For years, she had used her status as the golden child to keep me at arm's length, to maintain her place in the family. The way she had twisted the knife tonight, in front of all those people, had been a calculated move to try to push me back into the shadows where I belonged in her eyes. But I wasn't going to let her do that anymore. The cab pulled up in front of the apartment building, and I paid the driver before stepping out onto the cold sidewalk. The building looked the same as it always had, and remarkable. Even a little rundown, but to me, it felt like a fortress. A place where no one could touch me, no one could make me feel small. I went up to my apartment, the familiar hum of the elevator sending a jolt of comfort through me. When the doors opened, I stepped into the quiet hallway and walked to the door at the end. My keys slid into the lock with a satisfying click, and I stepped inside. The apartment was dark, save for the streetlight filtering through the blinds. I let my duffel bag fall onto the floor with a thud and kicked off my shoes, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. I crossed the small room to the window and looked out at the city below. It was a beautiful sight, so many lights, so much life, but I didn't feel connected to it. I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's story unfold. I let out a long breath, pressing my hands against the cool glass of the window, trying to ground myself. I had come so far to get here, and yet, the farther I pushed, the more I realized there was no escaping the past. But there was something different now. Tonight had been the beginning of something. A shift. A realization that I could not keep waiting for validation from people who would never give it. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to my family, to my mother, to Haley. But now I was starting to understand that I had nothing to prove to them. I was already enough. I turned away from the window and walked to my desk, where the invitation from earlier sat still unopened. I stared at it for a long time, the embossed edges mocking me. The name on the envelope was a name I had once carried proudly, but now it felt like a chain, a weight I didn't want to carry anymore. Without thinking, I grabbed the envelope and tore it open, the paper crinkling as I unfolded it. The name Haley was written in bold letters at the top, followed by the details of the wedding. The words blurred together for a moment as I stared at them, my mind racing with everything I had just experienced. The invitation wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol. A reminder that, despite everything, I had always been on the outside. Always second. Always less than. But not anymore. I dropped the invitation onto the table, watching as it fluttered for a moment before settling. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. I grabbed my phone from the counter and scrolled through my contacts. A few names popped up, but none stood out to me more than the one at the top. Colonel Simmons. He had been there for me through it all, through the years in Afghanistan. The deployments. The moments when I had been pushed to my breaking point. And tonight, his words had been the ones to keep me grounded. The ones that reminded me that I didn't need to wear my rank like armor. I had become something without it. Something they would never understand. I tapped his name and waited for the call to connect. General Cole? His voice came through, steady as ever. "It's me," I replied, leaning against the counter. "I did it." There was a brief silence on the other end before he spoke again. "And?" "I'm not going back. I'm done being their secret, Simmons." "I figured as much," he said, his tone light but knowing. "What now?" I paused, looking around the apartment at the space that had become my refuge, my sanctuary from the chaos I had once known. "Now," I said, the words feeling more like a declaration than a question. "Now I start living for myself." The next few days blurred into a haze of airport terminals, hotel lobbies, and empty nights in a city I had once called home. It wasn't until I found myself back at the base, standing outside my office, staring at the unmarked door in front of me, that the weight of the decision began to settle in. I had spent so many years being defined by my family's expectations, my rank, my role. But now, for the first time, I had made a choice that was mine. And mine alone. I had stepped away from their world, the world that had treated me like a ghost, like a phantom that only existed when they needed me for their image. But I wasn't a phantom anymore. The base was quiet, as it always was. It had a particular hum to it. The hum of routine, of purpose, Soldiers moved through the halls with precision, their boots clicking against the polished floors, their faces hard with focus. I envied them for that. They were part of something larger, something that held meaning. It was something I had once believed in too, but now it felt distant. The uniform, the duties, the drill sit all seemed like a distant memory. The buzz of the helicopters, the sound of gunfire in the distance, the rhythm of combat it had all faded, replaced by the buzz of office phones and the quiet tapping of keyboards. This was the world I had left behind, and I had no intention of going back. I pushed open the door to my office, stepping inside to the familiar sight of my desk, stacked high with papers and reports, waiting to be signed. I didn't touch them. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe, staring at the documents as if they were someone else's life, someone else's fight. I wasn't sure what I was doing here anymore. The phone rang, cutting through the silence. My eyes flicked to it, but I didn't reach for the receiver. It could wait. Whoever it was, they didn't matter. No one mattered in this space anymore. Not Haley. Not Andrew. Not the military. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. Simmons. "General," he greeted, stepping inside without waiting for permission. His face was grim, but there was a softness to his eyes. He had been my anchor for years, through the darkest of times. Now, standing in front of me, he was the only familiar face in a world that felt like it was spinning out of control. "Good to see you, Simmons," I said, my voice hoarse, even to my own ears. He nodded, but didn't smile. "I figured you'd be here. You know how things are at the Pentagon. They've already started moving. That resilience proposal? It's picking up steam." I blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. My mind flashed back to the meeting in the briefing room, the room full of brass and analysts. The moment I'd stood at the podium and made my case. It had felt surreal then, as if I were speaking not for myself but for something larger, something more than the coal name, more than the military. But now, in the quiet of this room, I could feel the ramifications settling in like a storm on the horizon. "I'm not going back, Simmons," I said firmly, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I can't. Not to that. Not to them. I've already burned that bridge." Simmons sighed, taking a step closer. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "you don't have to go back to them. But you do have a responsibility. You have a chance to make a real difference with that proposal. To do something that actually matters." "I'm not sure that matters to me anymore," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "I used to believe in all of this. The structure, the order, the mission. But now, I don't know. All I see is a system that discards people when they're no longer useful. Look at me. Look at what they did to me." Simmons didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me, like he was trying to find the words that would make me see reason. But there were no words. I had been through too much. I had fought too many battles, both on the field and in my own family, to go back to being anyone's pawn. "I don't need their approval anymore," I said, my voice stronger now, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing him or myself. He looked at me for a long moment, and then, finally, he nodded. "I can't make you go back. But don't forget what you're capable of, Rebecca. Don't forget who you are." I stared at him, at the quiet understanding in his eyes. The years of service, the years of sacrifice, all seemed like it had been for nothing. But maybe, just maybe, it hadn't been. "You know," Simmons said after a moment, "if you leave all this behind, you might find something that makes all the rest worth it. Not everything has to be a fight, Rebecca. You just have to decide what you want to fight for." I swallowed hard. I'm still figuring that out. With that, he gave a small smile, just a flicker of it, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't as lost as I had felt. "Take your time," he said, turning to leave. "But don't stay away too long. You've got a lot more to do than you think." As Simmons stepped out and closed the door behind him, I was left alone with my thoughts. The room was quiet again, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure if it was because I was finally at peace, or if I was still trying to silence the chaos inside me. That night, I sat alone at my desk, the flickering lights from the street below casting long shadows in the room. I had learned how to survive in silence, to fight without words. But now, as I looked out the window at the city below, I realized that maybe it was time to start speaking again. Not for anyone else, but for me. Maybe the fight wasn't over. Maybe it had just begun. The phone buzzed again. This time an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, but then answered it, my voice steady. "Hello? Rebecca," came the voice on the other end. "It's Andrew." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected to hear from him, not after everything that had happened. Not after the wedding. Not after the things that had been said. "I need to talk to you," he continued, his voice tight. "Can we meet?" I hadn't expected to hear from Andrew. Not after everything. Not after the wedding, the insults, the thinly veiled jabs, and the humiliation he'd stood by and allowed. He was supposed to be part of that world, the world of controlled smiles, of politeness, of family ties and burdens. But now, he was calling me. I stood in my office, holding the phone to my ear. The city lights below flickered like broken promises. It was almost like I could feel the tension in the air, the pull of everything unsaid, everything unspoken between us. His voice on the other end was strained, like he was carrying something heavy, something that didn't belong to him but had somehow gotten tangled up in his life. "Rebecca," he said, his voice quiet. "Careful. I know this isn't the right time, but we need to talk." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, my fingers trembling just a little. "What's this about, Andrew?" There was a long pause. "It's about what happened back there. What you said. What you did. Tu didn't expect any of it. And I didn't know how to handle it. It's just... everything's been messed up, Rebecca. I never thought things would get so... complicated." I could feel the weight of his words. They hung in the air between us like a barrier. Complicated. That was the word he used to describe everything. Everything that had happened between us. Everything that had brought us to this moment. But was it really complicated? Or was it just simple? Simple enough for him to walk away and marry my sister. Simple enough for them to let me vanish. To let me become a shadow of the person I once was. "It's not complicated, Andrew," I said, my voice steady despite the rush of anger that threatened to boil over. "It's just the truth. And I don't think you've ever been honest with me." "Not truly." "I know," he replied, his tone softening. "But I was trying to protect you. I thought you needed space. I didn't know how to fix things between us. I was lost." "Rebecca." I almost laughed at his words. Protect me? Space? The years of silence. The years of pretending like I didn't exist weren't the things I needed protection from. Number. It wasn't about space. It was about control. It was about keeping me out of the picture so they could build a perfect life, a perfect story, with no room for someone like me in it. "I don't need your protection, Andrew," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I never did." He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was low, almost resigned. "Then why did you show up? Why did you come to the wedding?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that question. Why had I come? To make a statement? To prove a point? Or was it something else? Something deeper? Something I hadn't fully understood until now? "I came because I had to," I said quietly. "Not for you. Not for Haley. But for me. I came because I wanted to see if I could still stand in the face of all of it. All the lies. All the betrayal. I needed to know if I could look you in the eye and still stand tall." I could hear him breathing on the other end. "Rebecca, I never meant for it to be like this. You have to believe me." No, Andrew," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You don't get to say that anymore. You don't get to rewrite the past. Not after everything. You made your choice, and I made mine. We're not the same people we were before. I'm not the same person. There was another long silence, and then he spoke again, his words slow, measured. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if it can be fixed. You can't fix it, I said, the words slipping out more easily than I had expected. Not anymore. All you can do is stop pretending. Stop pretending like I'm still that person who would fall in line, who would keep quiet and let you and Haley run the show. I'm not that person, Andrew. And I never will be again. He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. What more was there to say? The years of silence had done their job. They had made it clear that I was a part of their story only when it suited them. Only when it was convenient. I came to say goodbye, I said, my voice soft but resolute. Not to you, but to everything else. To the past. To the family I thought I needed. I'm done with it. And I'm done with you. I hung up before he could say anything more. The air in my office felt still, heavy. But this time, there was a sense of release. I had spoken my truth. And now, I was free. I stood by the window, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled, bright and far away. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the world pressing in on me. I didn't feel the need to prove anything, to answer anyone's questions. The silence was no longer something that suffocated me. It had become a space where I could breathe, where I could finally hear myself. But there was still one last thing I had to do, one last battle to fight. The next morning, I boarded a flight to Washington, D.C. The flight was uneventful, just hours of sitting in silence, thinking about what I was walking into. The Pentagon had called. They wanted to meet. I wasn't sure what they expected from me. Maybe they thought I would fall back in line, that I would return to the system and play by their rules. But I wasn't that person anymore. The car ride to the Pentagon was quick. The familiar sights of the city blurred past me. The towering buildings, the crowded street sit all felt so distant. This wasn't my world anymore, but that didn't mean I couldn't make it my own. When I walked into the Pentagon, the weight of the place hit me all over again. The polished floors, the bright lights, the echoes of voices from the past. It was like stepping into a memory I had left behind. But now, I was here with a purpose. They had called me in for a reason, and I wasn't about to disappoint them. The Pentagon's halls were unnervingly silent, like a place where decisions were made in whispers. I had walked through this building more times than I cared to remember, each time with a different mission, a different sense of purpose. Today, though, I felt nothing but the weight of the past hanging on my shoulders like a heavy coat I couldn't shake off. The irony of it all wasn't lost on Mahou, the place that had once been home to my career, the very institution I had served for years, had now become the stage for my greatest battle yet. The doors to the briefing room opened, and the cool, sterile air inside hit me. Inside were rows of faces. Some familiar, most not. They were all in uniform or business attire, their expressions somewhere between respectful and wary. Their eyes followed me as I entered, and the room fell into an awkward silence. The last time I had stood in front of an audience like this, I had been on the other side of the table, commanding, controlling, demanding. Now, I was simply an outsider, someone they couldn't quite place. General Simmons was there, standing at the front, his usual cool demeanor in place. There were a few other high-ranking officers, civilians I recognized from policy discussions, and several analysts, all watching me closely. The stage was set for something monumental, but all I could feel was the strange calm that had settled over me. There was no anxiety, no second-guessing. I knew why I was here. I walked to the podium, my military uniform still pressed and sharp, though it felt foreign now, like a shell that no longer fit me. I set my notes down on the lectern but didn't need them. I had come prepared for this moment my entire life, just not in the way I expected. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting, judging. But I stood tall, not just for them, but for myself. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. The words came easily, but there was power behind them. It wasn't the voice of a soldier, it was the voice of someone who had fought, who had bled for a cause, only to find that the very people I had trusted had turned their backs on me. "I know why you've called me here," I continued. "You want to hear from me. You want to understand why I've spent years away from the military, away from everything that used to define me. And to be honest, I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense to all of you, but I'll try." I paused, letting my words sink in. I could feel the tension in the room, the collective breath being held as they waited for me to reveal something they didn't already know. They were all expecting a speech about my career, about my role as a general, about my family, and how I had been wronged. But that wasn't why I was here. I'm not here to speak about family politics, about betrayals or power plays. I'm here to talk about something else, I said, my eyes scanning the room. I'm here to talk about resilience, about what happens when the system, the people, the very institutions we trust turn against us. What happens when the ones we serve, the ones we fight for, forget we exist? There was a murmur in the room, but I didn't wait for it to die down. For years, I've lived with the consequences of decisions made by people who couldn't see past their own egos. I've been erased, sidelined, and belittled for simply being myself too loud, too unyielding, too much of a threat to the status quo. And the worst part? I've let it happen. I've let my story, my voice, be silenced. But no more. I felt the words coming faster now, a wave of energy flooding me. This wasn't a lecture on military tactics. This wasn't a briefing about operations or strategic initiatives. This was me, standing in front of them, declaring that I would not be erased any longer. I've come to realize that the battle isn't just on the front lines. It's in the boardrooms, in the homes we've left behind, and in the lives we're expected to sacrifice for something that doesn't see us for who we really are, I said, my gaze hardening. So, if you're looking for someone to tell you why I left the military, why I chose to disappear for so long, here's the truth. I didn't leave. I was made to disappear. But I'm done hiding, and I'm done letting people like you define my story. There was a moment of silence that felt as heavy as 1,000 years. And then, I continued, I've spent my life fighting for something bigger than myself. I've earned my place. And I don't care if I have to fight alone to prove it. I could see General Simmons now, his expression unreadable, but I knew he was listening. He had always understood me better than anyone else in this room. The others, though, they were still processing, still trying to figure out how to handle what I was saying. But I didn't care. I'm not asking for your approval, I said, stepping away from the podium. But I am here to ask for something more important. I'm here to ask for the system to recognize that the deepest wounds don't always come from the enemy. Sometimes, they come from within. And we need a system that acknowledges that one, that protects its own, even when the people we trust most turn their backs on us. I didn't expect applause. This wasn't about a show. This wasn't about making them feel good. This was about making them uncomfortable, making them face the truth that they'd been avoiding for so long. The room was still, save for the occasional cough or shuffle of a chair. But as I looked around at the faces before me, something shifted. I could see it, the shift in perspective, the dawning realization that I was not a victim. I wasn't a casualty of war. I was someone who had survived it. And now I was ready to fight a different kind of battle. I'm proposing a new protocol, I said, voice steady. One that recognizes the toll personal betrayal takes on service members. We can't just protect people from the enemy. We need to protect them from the wounds we don't talk about, the wounds that come from those we love, from the very system that is supposed to protect us. I looked around the room one last time. The faces that had once been so foreign to me now seemed more familiar, more human. The battle I was facing wasn't just for recognition. It was for a change in the system, a change that could help others who had been left behind, just like I had. The Undersecretary of Defense nodded slowly. "We'll fund it," he said, his voice firm. And that, for the first time in years, was enough. The corridors of the Pentagon, with their polished marble floors and sharp angles, seemed like they belonged to another world now. A world I had once known so intimately. A world where I had risen through the ranks with only my will to drive me forward. But that world was behind me now. The battle I had fought there had been over for years, even if I hadn't known it yet. Walking out of the briefing room, I felt different. The weight of the past wasn't gone, but it was lighter. A strange sensation settled in my chest, like I was finally taking a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. It was just a step forward, a step toward something new, something I had never imagined for myself. As I made my way out of the building, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The drive back to my apartment felt like a dream, as if I were floating between the worlds of what had been and what could be. It was a strange sensation, one I had never quite experienced before, but there was no time to dwell on it. The fight I had started wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There were still too many pieces to move, too many lives that had been shattered in the same way mine had. I couldn't let it stop with me. If I did, what was the point of all this? The Resilience Foundation was still in its infancy. We had the funding, we had the message, but we didn't have the momentum yet. There was so much work to do, so many people to reach, and I knew that I couldn't do it alone. I hadn't realized how isolated I had become until I was confronted with that truth. I had always thought I was self-sufficient, that I didn't need anyone, that I could carry the weight of my experiences on my own. But now, looking at the larger picture, I knew I couldn't. The foundation had to grow. It had to reach every service member who had ever felt abandoned, every veteran who had been left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives alone. The problem was that the system didn't want to admit it had failed. It was easier to pretend that betrayal from within didn't exist. Easier to brush aside the mental toll of those who had been ignored, silenced, and cast aside. The military, and the world in general, wasn't prepared to acknowledge the depth of the wounds that were inflicted by those closest to you. As I sat at my desk later that evening, sifting through piles of documents, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from General Simmons. His message was short, but it hit me harder than I expected. "We need to talk." I had known Simmons for years, longer than anyone else in the military. He had seen me rise from a fresh-faced captain to the general I was today. He was the one who had always kept me grounded, the one who never allowed me to forget my purpose. But now, I wondered what he wanted. The last time I had seen him, things had been tense. He was the one who had warned me about the consequences of speaking out, the one who had encouraged me to think carefully before making a move. I was tired of thinking carefully, tired of measuring every step. I had been calculating my actions for years, making sure I didn't rock the boat too much. But I had already done that, and now there was no turning back. After a long pause, I responded to Simmons. "When?" He didn't respond immediately, but his message came through a few minutes later. "Now. I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. I set my phone down and stared at the message for a moment. It wasn't unusual for Simmons to come by, but the tone of his message was different this time. Something was off. By the time Simmons arrived, I had already changed into something more casual, a pair of jeans and a simple shirt. I didn't feel the need for any more pretense. I had already been stripped bare in front of everyone who mattered. When he arrived, his face was serious, the lines of stress more prominent than I had ever seen them. "Rebecca," he said as soon as he walked in, no formalities. "We need to talk about the foundation." I raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" Simmons took a seat at the small table in my apartment, his eyes never leaving me. "You're stirring up a lot of trouble with this," he said, his voice low, measured. "And not just within the military. You're ruffling feathers in places you didn't even know existed. There are people who are going to fight you every step of the way." I let his words sit in the air for a moment before responding. "I know," I said simply. "But it needs to be done. I'm not arguing that, he replied, rubbing his face. I'm saying you need to be careful. People aren't just going to hand this to you, Rebecca. They're going to fight dirty. And you're not just up against people in the military. There are politicians, powerful families, people who have a lot to lose if your foundation succeeds. I sat down across from him, folding my arms. I know who I'm up against, I said. I've spent my life fighting battles that no one else could see. This is just another one. Simmons looked at me for a long time, his eyes searching my face as if trying to figure out what had changed. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said quietly. But you need to be ready for what's coming next. I didn't flinch. I've been ready for this my entire life. Simmons leaned back in his chair, his eyes softening just a little. You're not the same person you were when I first met you, he said. You've grown. But just remember, you don't have to do this alone. I let his words sink in. For the first time in years, I realized he was right. I had been alone in this fight for too long. Maybe it was time to reach out, to let others help carry the load. I don't want to do it alone, I said quietly. But I won't let anyone stop me from doing what's right. Simmons didn't answer right away. He simply nodded again. Good. You'll need that fire if you're going to keep pushing forward. I stood up, walking toward the window that overlooked the city. The night lights were glowing in the distance, and for a moment, everything felt quiet, still. But I knew better than to let the silence fool me. The fight was far from over. The following days were a whirlwind of strategy sessions, private meetings, and hours spent reviewing case files for the Resilience Foundation. I barely had time to eat, let alone sleep. Every waking moment was consumed by the looming battle that was shaping up on all fronts. But amidst the chaos, one thing remained clear. I would not back down. Simmons had warned me that this fight wasn't just against the military. It was about shaking the very foundations of a system that had turned a blind eye to the damage done by betrayal. And it was about showing the world that the people they had overlooked, the ones they had silenced, could fight back. It was 3 a.m. when I received the message from one of the Foundation's legal advisors. The subject line read, "Urgent. Need to discuss new developments." My fingers hovered over the phone before I finally unlocked it, the screen lighting up the room in the dark silence of my apartment. We've been informed that there is a media push against the Foundation. Someone is using your past against us. I knew what that meant. The media had been quiet for a few days after the initial surge. But this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had orchestrated the backlash. I rubbed my temples, trying to force away the exhaustion that was threatening to swallow me whole. I couldn't afford to let this defeat me. The world would not be allowed to rewrite my story. This time, I was writing my own narrative. How serious is it? I typed back quickly, my mind already racing with possibilities. The Foundation was just starting to gain traction, and the last thing I needed was for my name to be dragged through the mud again. The response came back almost immediately. Very serious. Articles have already started circulating. A smear campaign. They're bringing up your family again. They're trying to erase the Foundation before it takes root. Of course they were. They knew the power of family ties. They knew how quickly the press could turn something into a scandal. But they didn't understand that I had been through this before. I knew how to stand firm in the face of a storm. And I knew how to strike when the time was right. I stood up from my desk, pacing across the room. It was a strange feeling. The weight of the Foundation resting on my shoulders. It wasn't just a project anymore. It was personal. The stories of the soldiers and veterans who had suffered because of betrayal, the lies they had been told, the damage done to their careers, it was all too real. I glanced at the clock. There wasn't much time left before I had to meet with the team. I had a decision to make. If I allowed this smear campaign to take hold, it would destroy everything I had built. But if I stood up and fought back, I could turn the tide. I wasn't afraid of what they could throw at me. I was afraid of losing the fight before I even had the chance to start. The phone buzzed in my hand, dragging me from my thoughts. The subject line was simple: Emergency Press Conference. You're the story. It was from one of the media consultants who had been working with us to handle the growing press interest. I opened the email quickly, my eyes scanning over the message. We've set up an emergency press conference for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. The message will be clear. The foundation is not going anywhere. You will address the media directly. It's time to take control of the narrative. I didn't hesitate. I knew what had to be done. The next morning, I stood at the front of the conference room, the bright lights overhead casting shadows across the sleek, polished floor. My heart beat steadily in my chest, but there was no fear in me anymore. This wasn't about my past. This wasn't about family. This was about the soldiers and veterans who had been abandoned, who had been discarded by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Behind me, a large screen flickered to life, showing the logo of the Resilience Foundation. The press had gathered in full force. There were cameras, reporters, and a handful of staff members sitting quietly behind me, preparing for what was to come. The room fell silent as I took a deep breath, stepping forward to the microphone. I could feel every eye on me, but this time, I wasn't afraid. The shame they had tried to attach to my name had lost its power. My name is Rebecca Cole, I began, my voice steady and firm. And I stand here today not because I want to be seen, but because the people I've dedicated my life to deserve to be heard. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The Resilience Foundation is not just an organization, it is a movement. It is a commitment to those who have been wronged, who have been silenced, and who have been abandoned by the very system they served. This foundation was born out of a need for change, a need to protect those who have been betrayed by their own families, by their own countrymen. I could feel the tension in the room. The reporters were scribbling notes furiously, their eyes fixed on me, but there was no interruption. I had their attention, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. There are people in this world who think that if they erase you, if they bury your story deep enough, no one will ever know the truth. But what they don't understand is that the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how hard they try to suppress it. I shifted my weight, letting my gaze sweep across the room. I wanted every person in this room to understand exactly who they were dealing with. I have been the victim of betrayal. I have been cast aside, ignored, and erased by those I should have been able to trust the most. But I am not alone. I know I am not the only one, and that's why we're here today. We're here to make sure that no one else has to suffer in silence. We're here to make sure that the voices of those who have been forgotten are heard loud and clear. I could feel the walls closing in, the pressure building, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. This isn't just a battle for my name, I continued. This is a battle for all of us. For every soldier who was thrown away. For every woman who was silenced. For every veteran who was told they didn't matter. The Resilience Foundation is our response to that silence. We will not be erased. We will not be ignored. A murmur rippled through the room as the cameras clicked, capturing every word I spoke. The press conference continued for an hour, but it wasn't about the questions or the statements anymore. It was about the shift that had just occurred. The foundation had been thrust into the spotlight, and now the world would have to reckon with its existence. When I walked out of the conference room, there was a sense of finality in the air. The battle wasn't over, but it had changed. I wasn't just fighting for my own redemption anymore. I was fighting for something greater. Something that would outlast the betrayals and the lies. The foundation was not just a reflection of my own pain. It was a beacon for those who had been left behind. And I would be their voice. The aftermath of the press conference hit faster than I had expected. News outlets across the country were buzzing with stories about the Resilience Foundation and my public declaration. Some hailed it as a groundbreaking step toward addressing a long-overlooked issue, while others were quick to point out the glaring contradictions in my story. The backlash, of course, was immediate. The media seemed eager to dig deeper into my past, my family, my career, the silent years that had been spent under the radar. They wanted a scandal, They wanted a punchline to my story, something they could dissect and twist into a sensational headline, but that wasn't what they got. Instead, I became a symbol of resilience, a symbol of reclaiming one's narrative after it had been stolen by those who thought they had the power to erase it. It wasn't easy, though. The more visible I became, the more I was thrust back into the world I had tried so hard to escape. I was bombarded by questions, emails, phone calls, and people from all corners of my life, some of whom had long since disappeared, suddenly reappearing, wanting something. But there was one call that changed everything. It came on a Friday afternoon, while I was sitting in my small office, going over legal documents for the Foundation's next project. My phone rang, the number unfamiliar. I almost ignored it, but something in me told me to pick up. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound as calm as I could. "Rebecca?" The voice on the other end was familiar. Too familiar. It was Andrew. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly masked the surprise. "Andrew," I said coolly. "What do you want?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him struggling with what to say. And for a moment, I almost felt a trace of the man I had once known. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice quiet but insistent. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the busy street below. My mind raced. What did he want from me? Was he going to apologize? Was he finally going to come clean about the things I had suspected for so long? Or was this another round of the game they had all been playing? "I think it's time," he continued. "I think we both know it's time to talk about Helmond." I felt the floor beneath me shift. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't let it show. "I'm listening," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. There was a long silence. I could hear him exhale on the other end of the line, a soft sound of resignation. "I'm not proud of what I did," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I've never been proud of it, but I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. How to face you. You saved my life, Rebecca. And for years, I didn't know how to live with that." I felt a pang in my chest. His words were the same ones I had heard countless times from soldiers I had worked with: regret, guilt, and the weight of a debt that couldn't be repaid. But this wasn't just any debt. This was a debt that went deeper than the minefield we had shared in Afghanistan. This was about betrayal. This was about trust. Or the lack of it. "You don't owe me anything," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "But you do owe the truth. So why now? Why bring it up now, when you've spent years ignoring it?" "I couldn't," he said, and there was a sense of finality in his tone. "I couldn't, because of Haley, because of what she meant to me. But now it's all falling apart. It's not just about the wedding, Rebecca. It's about the lies I've been living with." A wave of realization hit me. It wasn't just about the lies Haley had told me, or the things my family had done. It was about Andrew, too. He had been a part of it. He had known what had happened, but he had chosen to stay silent. He had chosen to play the part of the man who owed me, rather than the man who could have stood by me. "And what do you want from me?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I want you to know the truth. The whole truth. I don't want to hide behind the lies anymore," Andrew replied, his voice raw. "I never told you this, but Haley was the one who sent in the tip. The one that stalled your promotion to brigadier general." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected it. I had always known there was something between Haley's actions and my stunted career. But to hear him confirm it, there was something crushing in that truth. "Why did she do it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because she was jealous," Andrew said quietly. "She was jealous of you, Rebecca, of what you had, of what you represented, and she didn't want you to take anything from her." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, absorbing what he had said. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. The lies, the manipulation, the years of silence, all of it. But most of all, I was struck by the realization that Andrew had known. He had known the whole time. "Is this your apology?" I asked, my voice suddenly sharp. "Is this your way of making it right?" "I don't know," Andrew said, his tone filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can make it right. I just wanted you to know the truth. That's all." I was quiet for a moment, staring at the papers on my desk. The truth was a heavy thing to bear, and yet it was the only thing that had ever been real in my life. All the lies and the silence had been suffocating, but now I could breathe again. "I appreciate you telling me," I said finally. "But don't expect me to forgive you. Don't expect me to forget. I've spent too many years fighting for myself to let any and especially you write my story." He didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I understand," and with that, the line went silent. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The Foundation's work continued. The press continued to ask questions, digging into the past, searching for more secrets. But I had learned something from Andrew's confession. I had learned that the past could be a chain, or it could be a lesson. And for the first time in my life, I was choosing to see it as a lesson. The Foundation's case grew stronger as more veterans came forward, sharing their stories. The media that had initially criticized me began to take notice, and the tide slowly began to turn. For every story of betrayal, for every veteran who had been wronged, there were others who had fought to reclaim their stories, and I was just one of them. As I walked into the office one morning, a message flashed across my phone screen. "Major General Cole, please call the White House." I knew what that meant. The time had come for me to fight on a bigger stage. The fight had just begun, but this time, I wasn't going to be silenced. This time, I was going to make sure the truth was heard. And no one, not even the ones I once called family, could take that from me. The morning air was crisp, sharp against my skin as I stood by the window, looking out over the city. The first light of dawn broke through the clouds, casting an amber glow over the skyline. I was still wearing the same clothes I had worn yesterday, my mind racing with the events of the past week. The White House had called, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to step into the arena of politics, of power. I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but I had no choice now. The Resilience Foundation had gathered momentum faster than I had anticipated. The stories that came in from veterans who had faced the same betrayal by families, spouses, or even by the very institutions they had once served were pouring in. Every day, more soldiers, more voices, more names to add to the list of those who had been erased. My phone buzzed, snapping me from my thoughts. I checked the message. It was from General Simmons. "We've got your back, Rebecca. But be careful. This will get uglier before it gets better." The gravity of the situation hit me like a tidal wave. It wasn't just about my story anymore. It wasn't just about the betrayal I had faced. The Foundation had become a symbol of something much larger, a movement, even. It wasn't just about visibility anymore. It was about change, and change always comes with a price. I sighed deeply, running my hand through my hair. There was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was too early. I opened the door to find Sylvia standing in the hallway, holding a coffee cup in one hand and a thick folder in the other. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of determination and concern. "Morning," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She handed me the coffee, which I accepted without a word. "Morning," I replied, sitting down at my desk. I gestured for her to sit. She glanced at the folder she was holding and placed it down in front of me. "This just came through. I think it's time we took this to the next level." I raised an eyebrow looking at her. "What's next?" She opened the folder, revealing a series of documents, printouts, and legal papers. "The White House reached out because they want to get behind the Foundation. They see the potential in what you're doing, but they also want to ensure it's sustainable. We're talking about funding, legislative backing, and possibly even executive support. This is about a national policy change, Rebecca. We're talking about real power here. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. The foundation had always been about healing, about giving a voice to the voiceless. But this? This was something else entirely. This was a political game. This was the kind of game I wasn't sure I wanted to play. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, I said, my voice low. I didn't start this for politics. I started this because I was tired of watching people like me disappear. I started this to give them a chance to be seen, to be heard, not to be used for someone else's agenda. Sylvia's eyes softened, and she sat down across from me. She placed her coffee cup down beside the folder. I get it. Believe me, I do. But this isn't just about you anymore. This is about the people who need this, the ones who don't have the resources or the support to fight back. If we get the White House's backing, we can make a real difference. We can change the way the system treats soldiers, veterans, and families who are betrayed from within. We can turn this into something that lasts. I ran my fingers through my hair, taking in what she was saying. But I'm not sure I can trust anyone in that world. I've spent my whole life being erased by the people who were supposed to love me. The last thing I want to do is put myself in a position where I'm just another pawn in someone's game. I know, Sylvia said quietly. I know it's hard. But you don't have to do this alone. You have us. You have me. And you have all of the veterans who have been through hell and back. They trust you. And that trust is worth more than any political game. We're not doing this for the right to be heard, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. I took a deep breath, looking at the papers in front of me. And what if it gets worse? What if I'm exposed? What if they use everything they can against me? Sylvia reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. Then we'll fight back. Together. We'll fight until we get the justice we deserve. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle in. Everything was changing. Everything was moving faster than I could keep up with. But there was no going back. No matter how hard I tried, my name had been written into this story. It was already too late to walk away. I opened my eyes, meeting Sylvia's gaze. Okay, I said quietly. Let's do it. A few weeks later, I stood on the steps of the White House, looking up at the massive building before me. It felt surreal. A place that had always seemed so distant, so untouchable. But now, it was where the next chapter of my story was being written. Inside, the halls were lined with polished marble and historic portraits. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and history, a reminder of the legacy that had been built here. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this kind of legacy. But I didn't have a choice. The meeting was scheduled with the president's top advisors, a group of men and women who seemed to live and breathe politics. They weren't interested in stories or emotional appeals. They were interested in power. And power, I knew, could be used for either good or evil. As I walked into the room, I felt the weight of the moment press down on me. I was here, not as a general, but as a woman who had fought through hell to make sure others didn't have to. It wasn't about the uniform. It wasn't about the rank. It was about the truth. And I was determined to make sure the truth was heard. General Cole, one of the advisors said, extending a hand. It's a pleasure to meet you. We've been following the progress of the Resilience Foundation. It's clear that what you're doing has the potential to change the lives of many. I shook his hand, my grip firm. It's not just about changing lives, I said. It's about saving them. The room fell silent. I knew what I had to do next. I wasn't here to play games. I wasn't here to be used as a pawn. I was here to make sure that the policies they put in place would actually help those who needed it most. I've spent my life being told I didn't matter, I began, my voice steady. But what I've learned is that the ones who are silenced are the ones who need to be heard the most. The Resilience Foundation isn't just a platform for veterans, it's a platform for truth. It's time we start seeing those who've been erased. It's time we start hearing their voices. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I wasn't sure if they were listening yet, but I would make them listen. I wasn't going to let anyone silence me again. The silence in the room stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, the advisor spoke again. "We're listening, General, and we're ready to help make this happen. What do you need?" And just like that, I knew. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about getting even. This was about something far more powerful. This was about building a legacy that no one could erase. A few months later, the Resilience Protection Protocol was officially introduced. The bill, which would provide legal support, psychological assistance, and career shielding for military personnel who faced betrayal from within their own families, passed with overwhelming support. It was a victory not just for me, but for every soldier and veteran who had ever felt forgotten or betrayed. And as the cameras flashed and the press conference went underway, I stood at the podium, not as a general, but as a woman who had learned the true meaning of resilience. I was no longer the daughter they had tried to erase. I was the woman who had reclaimed her story, and no one would ever be able to take that from me.